Alright. Hey, I'm Aqua or Aquarius of Fallen Snow if you don't know me. If this is your first time to the channel, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Happy to have you here again. So, as you can see by the title of this Miro, in this video we're going to be talking about the Ouroboros, Zionism, and world politics. This is something I was thinking about last night and this morning, and I thought why not make a Miro board to put some more visuals to my thoughts, and then make a video about it and run through it with you guys and see what you think. But before we get too far into it, what is the Ouroboros? It's an ancient symbol depicting a serpent or dragon eating its own tail, originating from Greek for tail eating. It universally represents an eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth, as well as cyclical renewal, infinity, and the unity of all things. It signifies that destruction leads to new creation. And one of the key details I want to focus on in this video is the modern usage, where it's often used to describe a situation with repetitive, self-destructive, or self-renewing patterns. And here we're going to be looking at more of the self-destructive nature of it, but let's look at the first step of the cycle, which would start with Zionism. It's a Jewish nationalist movement that emerged in the late 19th century in Europe, advocating for the creation and support of a Jewish national state in their ancestral homeland, Palestine. It sought to provide a safe haven for Jews feeling persecution, with Theodor Herzl being a key figure in its political development. And like we read above, the primary goal was to establish a Jewish state, which was achieved with the creation of Israel in 1948. And obviously one of the problems is that it's often at the center of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with critics highlighting the impact on the native Palestinian population. And those 2 points, the homeland and the persecution, lead to the second step in the cycle, which would be desire for a Jewish homeland. From Zionism, I have the arrow pointing down here, safety and refuge. The movement was driven by the need for secure refuge from constant persecution, specifically the pogroms and violent anti-Semitism in Europe. Moving further down here to perspectives and critiques, historically, not all Jews supported Zionism. Some religious groups believed that return should only occur with divine intervention, while others favored integration in their home countries. And that's a key point. Not all Jews are Zionists, and not all Israelis are Zionist or even Jewish. There could be some people that were born in Israel that don't practice Judaism or don't follow the religion, and or who don't support the government and what the occupation is doing in Palestine, right? But as we can see down here, the creation of a Jewish majority state involved the displacement of the local Arab population, leading to ongoing conflict, with critics highlighting issues of displacement and military occupation, which leads us to the third and final step, which would be anti-Semitism. That being prejudice, hostility, or discrimination directed against Jews as an individual or group based on religious, cultural, or racial stereotypes. And this is really the part that I was thinking about the most, is that part of the Zionist movement is to say that it is unsafe for Jews to live anywhere but the Middle East and the Palestinian region, and that there's hostility towards the Jews. But by creating Israel, they are creating and perpetuating genocide of the Palestinian people, creating hostility towards the perpetrators themselves. Creating hostility towards the perpetrators, Israel, and the pathocrats, but the hate is misaimed at all Jews, not just the leaders, Zionists, and other accomplished people like Trump and the US government. Which unfortunately could take us back to Zionism, having some Jewish people converting to Zionism because they believe it's unsafe, and creating the cycle. But because I didn't have it on the board, let's quickly look at the definition of pathocracy for anybody who doesn't know, or so we can re-educate ourselves. Pathocracy is a form of government or governance where a society is controlled by individuals with severe personality disorders, particularly psychopathy and narcissism, as defined by Polish psychologist Andrzej Lobaczewski. These leaders lack empathy and morality, acting solely to consolidate power and exploit the population. It represents a total reversal of democratic values, where the state is turned against its own people often resulting in totalitarianism. And here's a few of the key points. Like manipulation of the truth, the regime uses paramoralism and doublespeak to twist language and logic, making immorality seem moral, a concept often associated with political ponerology. And we can quickly look at what political ponerology is as well, the concept being popularized by the same Polish psychiatrist. Lobachevsky advocated using the fields of psychology, sociology, philosophy, and history to account for such phenomena as aggressive war, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and despotism. Another key point I wanted to highlight about Zionism is the fact that it is a nationalist movement, which, if we follow this arrow over and we look at the definition of fascism, we can see that it's a far-right, authoritarian, and ultra-nationalist political ideology characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, and the forcible suppression of opposition. It prioritizes the nation and often race above individual rights, promoting strict social and economic regimentation. Ruled by a single leader, an intense focus on national unity and superiority, violent, dictatorial, or totalitarian suppression of dissent, the belief that violence is necessary and purifying for the nation, strong opposition of libertarianism, democracy, Marxism, and communism, economic control through regimentation of the economy, often through corporate-state partnerships. Which, continuing on, I connected that to similarities between Nazi Germany and modern Israel. I could have probably also included the states, but that's not necessarily what I'm looking at in this video because it's more about the irony of Israel and Zionism. And as we can see here, comparison between Nazi Germany and modern Israel are generally considered continuous, often arising in political discourse as criticism of Israel's policies. Some critics argue that they share traits like intense nationalism and expansionism, while others argue that these comparisons lack historical, moral, or practical equivalence and may constitute anti-Semitism. I wonder who says that. And as we can see here, these are some of the key points that makes them similar. And this made me laugh when I first read it. It says these comparisons are highly controversial, and many view them as a form of Holocaust inversion or misuse of historical tragedy to delegitimize Israel. Again, I wonder who says that. But this was the start of the boards and my thoughts on this, but it led me to some other ones. Looking at Hitler and the Nazis more specifically, I asked Google, could Hitler have been a Zionist if it meant getting Jews out of Germany? It replied with, based on historical evidence, it is inaccurate to describe Hitler as a Zionist. However, during the 1930s, the Nazi regime did temporarily support the emigration of German Jews to Palestine, not out of ideological support for a Jewish state, but as a pragmatic temporary means to make Germany clean of Jews. This tactic was part of an evolving, ultimately genocidal policy rather than a genuine, long-term alignment with Zionism. And as we can see here, the Haavara Agreement in 1933 was the only formal contract between Nazi Germany and a Zionist organization. It allowed German Jews to emigrate to Palestine and transfer a portion of their assets, often by purchasing German-made goods, breaking a global anti-Nazi boycott in the process. And then obviously some points to highlight why he wasn't a Zionist, but part of me does somewhat feel like he was playing a character of a leader. Before we move on to that though, I wanted to look up what the Haavara Agreement was, and here we can see it says it facilitated the emigration of roughly 50 to 60,000 Jews, rescuing them while allowing them to recoup some wealth by purchasing German goods, which were then sold in Palestine. So even if Hitler wasn't outright a Zionist, he did somewhat help Jews create Israel. But these were some of the things that I was looking into that made me think he might have been playing a character rather than being completely genuine to the things that he was saying and doing. You know what I mean? I think it would make more sense if I go down here. There are three kind of archetypes that I see with him. one of them being the jester, which symbolizes the wise fool who uses humor and satire to speak uncomfortable truth. This more is for comedians, but it does also talk a little bit about, this is what I was thinking of, the reversal of the roles. The jester represents a subversion of the social hierarchy where the lowest ranking person holds intellectual power over the highest. Now, this isn't 100% accurate here, but when we think of the backstory, him being an artist and wanting to be a painter, maybe he was pressured or the perfect candidate to prefer a different form of art, being an actor, right? More in the fact that it symbolizes the human capacity for transformation or to play a role, representing the bridge between illusion and reality, using their body and voice to translate text into emotional experience while often masking their true self, right? Kind of what these images depict. The stage, the world stage, right? And then finally the troll, but I was thinking about it more in the modern context than the old. In Scandinavian folklore and mythology, primarily symbolize the untamed, dangerous force of nature, mountains, forests, and darkness. They represent the unknown, chaos, and the other, acting as obstacles that test human bravery and wit. Additionally, they serve as guardians of the wilderness and personification of destruction. And I think we can also see these same archetypal traits with people like Netanyahu and Trump, right? And part of this changing of reality or pushing a narrative could be as simple as the symbol they used, where the origins of the swastika was an ancient symbol dating back over 7,000 years, originating in Eurasia, specifically Neolithic era southeastern Europe and Indus Valley civilizations, as a motif representing good fortune, the sun, and well-being, like religious uses through Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. We can see some of the more historical representations down here, which also kind of reminded me of Kabbahla, which is the Jewish mysticism and more spiritual side of it, being an ancient Jewish esoteric tradition and school of mystical thought aimed at understanding the essence of God, the origin of the universe, and the purpose of creation. Often referred to as received wisdom, translating literally to receiving, it provides a deep symbolic and spiritual layer to the Torah, seeking to reveal inner truths beyond literal interpretations. Right? And then going back to these pictures, some of the other connections I was making was with the Iron Cross, this medal that the leaders wear, and the Knights of Malta. But let's look at the significance of the Iron Cross medal first. In World War II, it was a Nazi German's premier military decoration for exceptional bravery and leadership, reintroduced by Adolf Hitler in 1939, featuring a central swastika. It served as a vital, high-volume propaganda tool to boost morale and recognize military merit across all ranks from soldiers to generals. And here we can see some different versions of the Iron Cross, right? And this 8-pointed cross is the Malta Cross, or the cross of the Knights of Malta. You can see it here next to an Iron Cross. And Erica Kirk was wearing a necklace with a cross and that symbol, right? The 8-pointed, right? The Star of Malta. It's hard to see because it's a low-quality image. You can find better ones. I was just kind of moving quickly through this part. And I even looked up the overlaps between the Iron Cross and the Knights of Malta, primarily existed in their shared lineage from medieval military orders and the evolution of their symbols from a common heretic root, the cross pate. And if we look that up, it basically looks like this, right? Different crosses here as well. Well, the Maltese cross, 8-pointed, and the Iron Cross, flared straight edges, are distinct designs. Both are historically connected to the tradition of Christian Crusader knights, specifically the Knights of Hospitaller, Knights of Malta, and the Teutonic Knights. Right, so zooming out a bit here, we can see some of the traditional robes, and going back to these images again, we can see the belt and the flared collar, or lapel, I forget what that part is called. Looks pretty reminiscent of this outfit, right? I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but even the sash, right? They have sashes. And then even these green coats, right? It looks more Soviet era, but it kind of looks like an evolution, right? And then that led me into the Freemasons with the Knights of Malta. You can see up here, Order of Knights Templar at the top of the degrees of Freemasonry. You can see an iron cross with the Malta cross, Freemason symbol on this jacket with a few others. Also looks like a Royal Archmason with this triangle, like the Order of the Red Cross, Order of Malta, Order of the Temple, right? I think this is the Knights Templar. Yep, that's their symbol. And interesting here, it says of St. John of Jerusalem, Palestine, Rhodes, and Malta. So Palestine was still recognized way before Israel, right? But what do we get when we look up Knights of Malta Freemasonry? The degree of the Knights of Malta is a high-level chivalric order with York Rite Freemasonry, typically conferred after the Knights Templar degree. It acts as an appendant ceremonial order focusing on the history of the Knights Hospitaller. It is distinct from the Catholic Sovereign Military Order of Malta, despite sharing a common, distant historical lineage. We can see the Pope with one of them here. He's got the crosses and everything, the medals, and then some more pictures of the family maps or the different levels of stuff. Right, you have the two-headed eagle here, ladies' organizations. Right, they have the York Rite, Scottish Rite, and it goes all the way up to the top. Same with here, different branches. Order of the Knights of Malta, which has an iron cross instead of the actual one. Same thing here. You get the idea. And then more pictures of what they wear. Right, they got the sashes or whatever. And then if we continue over here, that kind of got me thinking of Skull and Bones and more about, secret societies and stuff. Skull and Bones is an elite secret senior undergraduate society at Yale University, founded in 1832 by William Huntington Russell and Alfonso Toft, known as Order 322 or the Brotherhood of Death. It selects 15 juniors annually to join, aiming to cultivate leadership and influence. The group meets in a tomb on campus, producing many powerful alumni, including 3 U.S. presidents, right? And then we can see from this picture that one of them was George W. Bush, and this is where it takes place on the campus, I guess, right? So then George W. Bush, 9/11, the connection with CIA and Al-Qaeda. I'm not going to go through this too much. If you want to read it, you can pause it, read it yourself, or do your own research. This, I asked, was the CIA or MI6 involved with Oxford, England? And it says yes, both were, which is where they say that Osama bin Laden attended he didn't attend the University of Oxford as a student, but he did attend an English language course in Oxford, England, 1971, while a teenager. Right, we can see the facial structure, looks pretty similar. And then that led me to the War on Terror stuff. What happened after the U.S. invaded Afghanistan? You can also look up, did the U.S. end up controlling oil and poppy fields in Afghanistan? What happened to the poppy fields in Afghanistan? And the Wikipedia page talking about it, it goes pretty in depth. But then, CIA involvement with trafficking drugs and stuff, because how would these organizations get the money they need to do the things that they do if it's not trackable through taxpayer money? It's probably going to be through drug running, human trafficking, and blood and organs like adrenochrome and all that shit. But yeah, again, that leads me to thinking that could have been set up, because even from World War I, the Rothschilds were influencing a lot of the First World War, and that kind of gets me back to the Kabbahla and looking at, the Kabbahla and planets. We can see that Saturn is usually pretty high up, whereas Earth is usually at the bottom, and that leads me to, the Saturn matrix or the Saturnian matrix, which is a largely metaphysical conspiracy theory positing that Saturn radiates a frequency of energy field that acts as a matrix or cage, restricting human consciousness and trapping souls in a cycle of reincarnation. It draws on Saturn's mythological role as a restrictive god and limitation, suggesting a manipulation of reality. right? And there's a lot of symbolism that goes on with this. Different company logos, black cubes in general because the shape is within the Kabbahla, right? Same with the beehive and the honeycomb, right? A lot of symbolism. Sorry, these pictures aren't the best quality. This one's a bit better. How do you make a cube? If it's on a 2D surface, it looks like a cross, right? Vivian Westwood. And, you know, more of the same. The Kabbahla tree of life with sacred geometry, right? As above, so below kind of thing. This is a really cool image, you know, and then you can introduce the colors to it because you have the 3 primary and the 3 secondary. So you can go pretty deep with it, you know. But I feel like this is also part of the same Ouroboros, right? Keeping us trapped in the thinking that it could be all Jews controlling the world when really it's the people in power, the pathocrats, the authoritarians, the dictators, the fascists, you know. And then I wanted to get these to look into them a little bit more and see if there's anything else I can add. If you want to find these yourself, you can look up Conspiracy on Your Life poster or the Great Awakening poster and it should come up. But you know, I think this is all somewhat of an Ouroboros. You can get too caught up in it. I try not to. I think it's important to talk about, especially with the US and Israel just striking Iran, and then we see Benjamin Netanyahu left Israel when Iran was retaliating. But I also want to look into what happened in Iraq, because I feel like they're running the same playbook over and over again, and people aren't really waking up to it. But hopefully more videos like this, or more people thinking like this, asking questions and doing their own research, is going to help people become more awake and understand what's going on in the world, right? But yeah, I don't want to keep this video going on too much longer. I think this is a good place to set it down for now. If you enjoyed, make sure to show some love. It would be greatly appreciated. And subscribe so you don't miss any of the new videos I post. It's all free. Takes a second and it helps the channel out a ton, right? But yeah, like I said, I'll leave this one here for now. I hope you enjoyed, and like I say at the end of all my videos, I love you, stay safe, good luck, and take it easy.